Carry On Only, dedicated to inspiring your next global adventure. With award-winning photographer, creative director, and travel expert, Jill Pater. Jill has worked in over 100 countries, has published 21 books on architecture, design, travel, and gastronomy. Now, here's Jill and her co-host, Lisa Polacek.
Hey, Jill, where do you want to go today?
I think we should go to Peru.
Why Peru?
Well, it is on most people's bucket list. So this is another listener's choice where people wanted us to go, so we went. And Peru, the major draw to Peru for most travelers is Machu Picchu. It's the ancient Inka ruins. But there's so much else there, and I think it's really a great place for travel enthusiasts, adventurers, as well as foodies to go. And we have a lot of foodie listeners, so we'll delve into that for sure.
Very good. Beyond Machu Picchu, what kind of research did you do so that you knew a little bit of what to expect?
There's two things I have that surprise a lot of people because I travel so much. But one is anxiety before I fly, and the other is altitude sickness. So I was just kind of researching, the altitude where, kind of getting down to base in Cusco, which is the neighboring city to Machu Picchu, and just seeing what else it has to offer. I knew I was going to spend a lot of time in Lima. So I look through, I find out what's going on in terms of architecture and design, the latest and greatest in hospitality, new places that are being built. One of the great things about Peru, it's the best of the ancient world and the new world. So you kind of have this interesting mix of, again, the most ancient ruins in the world, or some of the most ancient ruins in the world. And from there you go into the bustling city of Lima, which is like top of the list for a lot of foodies, for a lot of the latest, greatest restaurants. So it's an interesting trip. It's not like any other trip that I've done in terms of having this kind of serene landscape, this very spiritual place that Machu Picchu can be in the Sacred Valley. And then going from there to a bustling city is a unique mix.
Did you go in with any specific shooting ideas in mind? Any architecture or landscapes or resorts that you knew you wanted to capture, or did it happen did it unfold before your eyes?
It was a little of both. I definitely knew I'd be doing a lot of the landscape shots, and especially in the Sacred Valley in Machu Picchu area. Some of the resorts came up as a surprise. I like to go and just kind of see what's there first and then decide what I'm going to photograph, especially if it's going into a specific book. Because those doors tend to open once you get there.
Mm-hmm. And so what are some examples of places that ended up published in a book you've done?
Well, a couple of resorts, which we'll let our viewers check out online because they'll have access to the show notes, which will be in the link. So you'll get to see beautiful interiors and exteriors of some of the resorts in the Sacred Valley area, also in Lima, as well as pictures of Machu Picchu.
Perfect. Okay, so show notes. What kinds of activities? How did you spend your days there?
So it was great because it was a very varied trip in terms of first getting to Cusco, just navigating the city, seeing all the pre-Columbian architecture and artifacts and arts. There's actually quite a bit to do in that city in terms of seeing churches and architecture and the food in Peru, which is amazing. So those were the first couple of days were spent in Cusco, just getting adjusted to the altitude, and then heading up into Machu Picchu, which is about a 20-minute train ride, so very close. And I thought, when I was booking this trip, a lot of people kind of do this big hike into Machu Picchu, and I thought, I'm going to book a guide, and I'm going to book, a couple days hiking. I want to spend a lot of time hiking in Machu Picchu. I'm in great shape. This is going to be amazing. Of course, I met my guide, whose name was aptly named Angel. And nice. I was hiking for like 5 minutes. I'm like, I'm so tired. This is like, I can't breathe at altitude.
Okay.
And Machu Picchu is quite big. Like even if you're just doing the, perimeter and seeing things, it's a pretty active hike. And if you're not used to, again, the altitude, it takes a little more out of you. So I booked that. I booked a couple other hikes around as well, which didn't go quite as long as I had intended. Instead of being 8-hour hikes, they were probably closer to 1.5. But it was still an amazing experience just being up there, and it's just one of those places you've seen it a million times in photos and books, but to actually be there and be kind of hiking in and around it is such a unique experience. So I spent probably 3 or 4 days there. and then headed to Lima, which again was a very different experience. Actually, there was a stop in between. I was in the Sacred Valley then for a couple of days, just kind of relaxing, doing spa and wellness shoots. And then I headed from there, very quiet, very serene, into Lima, which is major city, bustling, full of arts and architectures and the other things that we love.
When you're talking about your ambitions for hiking a lot, whether you did it or not,
no judgment.
Do you feel as though the ideal traveler should be pretty fit and flexible and ready to hit the trails, or can you be, let's say, a little more leisurely and maybe rely on some more transportation to get where you need to be?
There's certainly more leisurely ways to do it. I wouldn't recommend booking hikes on top of actually visiting Machu Picchu, if that's not your jam. But I would say it was more rigorous than I had anticipated, even just like getting to the main point. So it's definitely for somebody who's a little bit more ambulatory.
Okay.
You don't have to be in crazy fitness shape.
Yeah.
But it is helpful, like if you're not somebody that can walk a long time or has trouble climbing on any level, it's probably not, it wouldn't be my first stop as a recommendation.
Okay. What other surprises did you encounter other than really needing to put on the mileage?
Getting better in shape?
Yeah.
I think being in the Sacred Valley was interesting because it was so peaceful, it was so serene, and it felt so different. Sometimes when as a tourist you're in these areas that are so busy and touristy, and when you get out of that, you're just really in it. You're in this like kind of place that's so different, and meeting people and meeting, I've always been lucky in that I find great guides everywhere I go, and I had a great guide, and I met him and his family, and he took me all over the Sacred Valley, but we were just alone, for like a couple days at a time, traversing the area. And that was a unique experience and kind of a surprise. I didn't anticipate that low of a population density or not being around other tourists as much for that part.
Okay. Do you have maybe a top 3 list of highlights?
Yes. So I loved Cusco. I love the churches. I love the arts and architecture and museums. Peruvian cuisine, amazing. I love to do cooking classes everywhere I go. Not that I'm actually going to recreate these dishes at home, but just so I kind of understand like what's available and what goes into it. And you learn so much about the history and culture of a place by what goes into their food. I was very impressed. I did a mixology class there. Peru is known for pisco, and so they do amazing pisco cocktails and have all these concoctions, which are delicious. Ceviche, tiradito, all the raw seafood dishes that they do are off the charts. So food is definitely a big one. And then Lima as well. I love the art scene in Lima, and just having that totally diverse experience, from being in the ancient ruins to being, in the heart of a very busy city.
Mm-hmm. When you're not taking a cooking class or a mixology class, what kinds of environments are you in when you're eating and drinking?
All different. So I try to do a little of everything, like from the street food and markets, which I love, right? So very affordable, budget-friendly options, all the way up to I usually research like a couple of the top restaurants and see if I can kind of get in. And Lima in particular has a few Michelin-starred restaurants. I love seeing what new chefs are doing, creating in the region. So a mix of both. And then obviously because I photograph luxury, wellness, hospitality, hotels, I'm in those environments as well, relaxing and checking things out.
Very good. How are you getting from place to place when you're not on one of your marathon hikes?
Well, usually a driver, driver, inland transportation. So, short flights between the cities in Peru. For the Sacred Valley, the days I was in the Sacred Valley, I hired a driver to kind of take me around because the places are very, far apart. And the driver was also a guide, so that works well in terms of seeing things. And then sometimes too, I love when it's available public transportation. Can
you arrange transportation for yourself spur of the moment, or do you kind of have to have a game plan for this is what we're doing tomorrow and this is who's taking me?
For the most part, I think you can do things relatively spur of a moment. I usually like to have a couple contacts in advance, and especially because Machu Picchu is one of the most visited places in the world.
Right.
I would book that. I would book your guide for that in advance, as far in advance as you can.
Okay. Is there an ideal time of year to visit Peru?
The best time of year to visit is generally April through October.
Okay. And how long should somebody commit to being there?
That's always a tough question. I recommend, and I try to be as, realistic as possible, knowing that, some people don't have a lot of vacation time, but I would recommend a minimum of 7 days. You probably want longer than that. But if, say, you're doing Cusco and Machu Picchu, maybe a short trip into Lima, 7 days would allow you to kind of scratch the surface of that.
Okay. Budget-wise, what does it take as far as airfares, transportation while you're there, food, accommodations?
Food is relatively reasonable in Peru, unless, of course, you're eating at, the top restaurants. But budget, airfare, it depends what city you're flying from. You can find reasonable flights to Lima from most U.S. cities. And then from there, your accommodations, really, they're a little bit more expensive in Machu Picchu because there are less accommodations. But in Lima, the world's your oyster in terms of if you want to stay at budget accommodations to the top luxury places. So it really depends on, how you want to travel.
Okay.
But there are budget options for sure available.
Okay. I would imagine there are ways of going top-notch luxury if you wanted to.
Absolutely.
Any favorites?
There are quite a few in the Sacred Valley, and we have those featured in the online magazine.
Perfect.
Which you can drool over and hopefully book your trip.
Right on. Okay. You are known for traveling with one bag that you can carry on. And in fact, you did an entire book and visited 100 countries by packing only one bag. What's your packing advice for visiting Peru?
For Peru, altitude, anytime you're at altitude, it typically means hotter days and cooler nights. So you want a mix of gear and the lightest gear that you can possibly have. So that typically means technical. So having wool tops or things that you can kind of hike in and then layer. So the lightest amount of clothes that have the most amount of temperature protection and definitely layers for Peru.
And
it's
then
pretty casual. It's Machu Picchu and the hiking area, everyone's pretty casual there. In Lima, if you're going out at night, then you would want to take it up a notch and have evening wear.
Right. So you're going to a Michelin-starred restaurant and you're going to take down some serious mixology cocktails.
Yes.
What are you wearing then?
You need the right outfit for that.
Yeah, of course.
Yes. I love packing. I for my evening wear, I usually have one or two dresses, pair with shoes that are still comfortable because again, you're walking through streets and you usually take a cab at night or some type of transportation, but you still kind of want to walk around and see what's in the area. So still having, dress shoes, but things that are very comfortable at the same time.
Very good. Well, this has been great. As we've said, there's a lot of resources that you can see on the show notes and the website, so we hope you'll look at that. That's all the time we have for today, so please just join us again next month when we have our next episode of Carry On Only with Jill Pater.
Carry On Only.
Thanks for listening to Carry On Only, dedicated to inspiring your next global adventure. Listen to Jill take you around the world in style, live every week right here or 24/7 on demand at starworldwidenetworks.com. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. For immediate access to Jill's destination guides, blog, and show notes, please visit jillpater.com and follow her on Instagram at Jill Pater.